Okay, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining this session from today. I welcome you to another edition of my partnership series, especially for African entrepreneurs. So, this is devoted to what I call something I know is on the way to occurring within the African space, which I tag as the African emancipation. Just bear with me. I'm trying to put everything in place, and I hope that you can hear me loud and clear. Just to be double sure that you can hear me, please just pop it in. If you can hear me loud and clear, please, I would be grateful if you can just put that in the chat, as that is going to help me. Thank you for joining this conversation today. I'm still trying to put things in place. Just bear with me. And thanks again for as many people that joined last week and those who couldn't join but took it upon themselves to, check the video and then pass their feedbacks. I'm happy for all of those comments. And then, yes, I've also been privileged to, have questions that were really, really and truly challenging. Challenging in the context of, not just seeking to know more now. Oh, thank you so, so much, sir. Thanks for joining. So I've been privileged to, have that um, open conversation, questions around things that weren't really clear, or even areas where my listeners felt otherwise as against what I was putting forward. And that's the beauty of this conversation, is to help us to continue and then share thoughts and ideas and see what can be done better in the context of our continent, Africa. Remember, I would usually say something. The essence of this conversation is to make sure that we are positioning people in, especially through the knowledge and information that is coming to them, such that when the opportunity period shows up, they would have been able to build sufficient capacity to harness the opportunity. And then, for me, this is one of the ways we can ensure that Africa is then put in a benefit position. And then I think this is also something we can do for posterity. This is how we can make sure that we are safeguarding the interest of our children and those coming after us. That being said, I welcome you once again, and in today's conversation, I'm going to be discussing, taking case studies and real world examples to illustrate successful partnership dynamics. So, I'm going to be sharing experiences, stories of partnerships that have worked. I'm going to also be sharing partnerships that, of course, didn't work. But yes, I'm going to focus most especially on partnerships that have worked, and then I will try to analyze the factors of those things that helped the partnership to work. And then hopefully you can pick ideas for your own business from the stories I'm going to be sharing in this episode. Let me start with a story. Um, Growing up, some of us had parents who were so united that we just couldn't trick them to get what we wanted. Interestingly, some of you listening to me will be able to this resonate so much. And growing up under my parents, I also had friends who could get things from both parents. And one of the reasons was definitely because the parents didn't know whether that the other person had already provided the same thing. So we find some children being exploitative with their parents, and definitely that was because there was a gap somewhere. So sometimes you also find that parents will try to show that they cared more by giving extra. So it then becomes a political situation where one parent is pitching himself or herself as the better parent against the other parent. And you'd find that this happens a whole lot, especially in situation of divorced parents or parents that are going through divorce and are trying to show that they are the best parent that has the best interest of the child at heart. And the point is that kids quickly notice this, and when they notice it, the next thing they do is they start to use that to their advantage. And so, coming back to business now, the point I'm trying to make is certain partnerships could be so toxic such that there is little or no coherence between the partners, and then eventually what happens is the situation then leads to a state where the stakeholders begin to exploit the differences among the partners. And stakeholders in this context could be the employees, could be regulators, could be competitors. So when there is no coherence, when there is no synergy, when the synergy isn't right among partners, this is one of those things that is bound to happen. And what's the point I'm trying to make in the start? The best partnerships are the ones where strengths are identified and weaknesses are also covered. What do I mean by this? Take the example of Steve Jobs, and I would use that which Steve Jobs cited, which is the example of the Beatles. This happened to be a music band in the 60s, and Steve Jobs cited the Beatles as a perfect example of a successful business partnership that every partnership should adopt or should understudy. Let me use that word. And one of those reasons Steve Jobs cited them was because he admired their collaborative spirit and the synergy that they were able to achieve as a group. So, what I've tried to do is to then try to, study um, the synergy of this music band, so that we can then see what are things we can learn, what are things we can pick in business and in partnership from that music band. And I'm going to be sharing some of those things with you in today's conversation, making it juicy and precise. Number one thing is the fact that there is synergy in terms of their strength. I'll choose to say it this way: the band was able to complement themselves in terms of their respective strengths. Before there can be a synergy, there has to be individual strengths. And one of those things I found with African entrepreneurs is the fact that sometimes we make sentimental decisions in the choice of people that we bring on board our business. So you find, well, I haven't done any research on this, but chances are you'll find a large chunk, a large percentage of businesses built as family businesses. You'd find people registering brands, registering companies, and having their father, their mother, their brother, their sister, their children as part of the business. And you will not find that this is being done because of a competitive advantage by reason of some, strength that those people are bringing on board. Rather, they are part of the structure by reason of blood and water, or flesh and blood, whichever one we choose to call it. But this is what we tend to do in Africa. And unfortunately, that has bedeviled us over the years. In essence, what I'm pushing for is we need to begin to talk about competencies. We need to begin to talk about individual strengths as against the sentiment of this is my flesh and blood, as against the sentiment of this is my family member. And this is one of the reasons that we build people within our structure or our culture that come up with that mentality of ownership, even though they did not bring in any form of intellectual support. Rather, there is the context of this this is our business. And then you begin to wonder, those who really are bringing in the intellectual support are nowhere. Instead, the people that are up there are people that are positioned there by reason of the fact that they are family members, or there is something that connects them with the key person in the business. So, what am I saying in essence? Partnership should become a conversation around competency. Partnership should cease to become a thing of family as it is currently in Africa. And this is something that is crucial that we need to look into. So, talking about the Beatles, there were individual strengths that made the team at that time to be unbeatable. So, take the example of John Lennon, McCartney. These guys were exceptional songwriters among the team. And then we had the example of George Harrison, we had the example of Ringo Starr, and these guys were the technical guys. So George Harrison, for instance, was a guitarist, and then Ringo happened to be a talented drummer. Now, bringing all these guys together into a collective whole was what made them to be able to defeat competition. They had their respective strengths. So nobody was coming as a weakling among the team. Everybody was coming with one thing or the other to the desk. And that's what partnership should be all about. So together, they were able to, complement their individual talents, and such that they were able to fit perfectly with those talents. And the next point is the fact that there was collaboration and teamwork among them. So in essence, there was the individual strength that they each brought to the table. And at the same time, I tell people something, that strengths are weaknesses manifested in another way. In essence, if you take a coin and you turn it around, it has two sides. The same coin can manifest itself as side A, or it can manifest itself as side B. It is what the person holding it is choosing to allow people to see. And that is the same way strengths and weaknesses are. If you choose a side, you can choose to put a side forward that demonstrates a habit or a capacity as a strength, and you can choose to put the other side forward that demonstrates the same habit or capacity as a weakness. So, in essence, while these strengths were there and all of that, it also brought about individual differences. So, such that the team, the way they were able to manage those differences was in setting a shared vision among themselves. They were able to come up with shared visions and shared goals of what they seek to achieve, who they seek to be, how they seek to do, and all of these things. And it's why I tell people, before you set out into partnership, you must have all of this conversation. Unfortunately, people do not end up having this kind of conversation before they step out into synergies. We find people having deep conversation on the journey instead of before the journey. And this is one of the things that lead to the death of many businesses out there. So if you are going to be learning, if you're going to be picking this example and picking the explanation I'm sharing today, the point I'm trying to make is that there has to be that understanding that there are differences, just as there are differences in strengths, there are differences in weaknesses. And one of the things you can use to ensure that you overcome those weaknesses is to make sure that there is shared vision, there are common goals among everybody. And these are things that are then helping you to generate results in that synergy. And the top thing I want to mention very briefly is the fact that they had an effective approach to managing their differences, while making sure that the differences weren't the same reason that would lead to their demise. And interestingly, I'm going to get to that because ultimately, at the tail end of their journey, you find that these same differences were things that led to the demise of that brand at that time. So, point three I'm making in essence is, while there are differences, you need to look forward to the bigger goal. What is the goal that we are coming together to achieve? Take the example of European Union, for instance. Don't be shocked. Somebody mentioned recently that as big as EU is, among the EU membership, There are countries that are not necessarily the best of friends contextually, but they all came together for a bigger goal. And that bigger goal is something that would mandate that they need to leave their differences for that bigger goal. And this is how partnerships should also be structured. There has to be something that is bringing everybody together. There has to be something that is bigger than everybody and is making everybody to forego their differences or their limitations for that bigger goal. So you can have culture difference, you can have a lot of other things, but you have to find a point of synergy. It's like crossing an X. The point of synergy is that portion where there is a meeting point. You have to find that meeting point in your relationship, which is very crucial. And coming to Africa now, the interesting thing is that many Africans are misled by cultural, social, or even their differences in religion and beliefs. In essence, you'll find people that will tell you that, well, this person has the capacity to be my partner on this in this business project, but we cannot synergize because we are not of the same religion. We cannot synergize because we are not of the same background. We cannot synergize because the ethnic group that this person belongs to, they have a history of doing ABC, which is against my own history or my own fundamental beliefs. So you find in Africa a lot of these things, they happen to now be the clog that makes potential partnerships, potential synergies to not come to place. And we need to begin to rethink all of these things. How it is that social, conversations, cultural limitations, religious limitations, and unnecessary ethical things have taken us or has drifted us from going the path of possible synergies that would have made a lot of difference on our journey as a people and as a continent. And I leave that on the desk so that we can begin to have that conversation further. But moving away from there, the fourth thing that I need to mention about the synergy of the B2 is the fact that there was a willingness to innovate and to evolve. So they were able to have that relevance over different epoch, different periods of time in their time. And the example that comes to my mind about this, the conversation about relevance, is Jack Dorsey and Twitter, as it were, in those days. Those days, I mean, before it became X. Now, the good thing is when Jack Dorsey was actively on board, Twitter happened to be a social enterprise. Jack Dorsey knew what the vision was. He knew what they wanted to achieve. But Twitter got so big that there was a need to make an adjustment to the vision. And Jack Dorsey knew it wasn't the best in terms of capacity, in terms of the vision that the brand was getting into at the time. And there was that flexibility, there was that willingness to take the back seat such that the brand is allowed to evolve and to also innovate. So we as people, and I'm speaking especially for African entrepreneur. Now, this thing is already built so much in our blood that we want to take ownership by every means. Look, you do not take ownership by being the driver of that car. You take ownership by sitting at the owner's corner and then making sure that there is an overview or there is a supervisory role being played from that owner's corner that influences the direction of the car in this context, which is the business. And we need to begin to rethink the definition of power. We need to begin to rethink the definition of authority. And we need to begin to see things from that context, that light, whereby we are able to bring in people, have synergies, and are able to also innovate and evolve over time and allow fresh ideas to come on board the business. These were things that sustained the B2 in those days. And unfortunately, I was saying earlier on, as much as we have these things to learn from the B2, there are also things we can learn not to do in partnership, because the same differences that they had, which they managed over a period, was the same thing that divided the band and led to their demise at the end of it. And what do I mean? Towards the tail end of that synergy, you find that there were partners that became politically inclined, and it was showing in the kind of music composition where we had those that just wanted to do music for entertainment, and so they were unable to manage these differences, and eventually there became a crack. Yoruba will say, "Togiri oba lainu, alangba ole wogiri." Pardon me for that. The interpretation is that if there's no crack in the wall, you cannot have the lizard having an opportunity to move across the spaces of the wall. And this is what it looks like in business. You need to continue to evolve over time. You need to continue to find differences and respect differences, find solutions to make sure that differences are respected, but the common vision and the common goal, they continue to, you continue to stick to those things. And you need to know this. See, the key to a successful partnership is to keep using each other's strengths, keep using one another's strengths, and then you need to also handle differences very well. I tell you something, many strong partnerships, they failed because they stopped focusing on their strengths. They stopped focusing on those strengths and they got caught up in the web of their differences. It's as if, just as I mentioned the other time, two sides to a coin. If you keep looking at the side of the strength, it keeps empowering you. But if you refuse or you stop looking at that strength and you start looking at the weak side of the coin, then what happens is that you begin to find faults, you begin to find reasons for the synergy not to work and all of that. And this is the secret. This is one of those things you can do that would make that relationship to work. So, and you just need to, you need to learn it, because if you keep focusing on the weakness part of that coin, what it will do is it will make you to forget to appreciate the strengths of your team members, the strengths in the synergy, despite the differences that exist among the people or among the partners, as it were. So this is very crucial to what you are doing, and I know it's something that will really, really help you. The other part of this conversation, which I really want to emphasize before I wrap up for the day, is the need to begin to think how we can gravitate towards synergies instead of competition. What do I mean? You'd find that in the European context of partnership, you'll find that a big brand that is well established in an industry and moving to a new industry would rather buy a brand in that new industry or synergize with that brand in the new industry than go into the new industry and start something afresh from the bottom up. But in Africa, what we can, or the potential, the chances are that you'll find an established brand going into a new industry, starting from bottom up and wanting to swallow those that are already in the industry. I do not think that is the way to go. I think that the way to go is to begin to collaborate. In essence, if I'm a giant in an industry and I want to go into a new industry, can I find an entity that is a giant in that industry and collaborate with? This again is a challenge that will test our individual perspective and our urge for power, quote and unquote, and a lot of other things. But you would understand with me from the context I'm coming from and how this whole thing around culture has limited us over the years, in terms of the possible synergies that we can have as a people, which I am pushing forward that we need to begin to think of. So sometimes you can even leverage on synergies to even buy, you buy your brand time to grow. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples here. So number one example is the example of Apple and Intel. In that synergy, for many years, I think between 2006 to 2020, Apple was using Intel's processor to power its MacBook. And that synergy helped Apple to be able to then come up with its own ideas, its own solution, which then, came to be in year 2020, such that Apple then created its own processor, which we then refer to as M1 chip, which was the first processor that Apple created. Now, what's the point I'm trying to make? The years of synergy helped Apple to keep understanding, to keep building, and then to eventually launch its own thing. You can see prospect, you can see potential in this kind of arrangement, which eventually would make a win-win. Now, that's example number one. Example number two, we had the example of Google and NASA. In that synergy, which I once mentioned, I mentioned it in one of my series. In that synergy, you'll find that what NASA did was to provide imagery and data to Google. Now, Google then used its capacity to integrate the information from NASA, such that from that they were able to come up with a product known as Google Earth. What Google Earth has been able to achieve over the years is that it's been able to allow users, to allow people to have an idea of the moon, the Mars, and every other thing outside of the space virtually. It also has helped for educational purpose and many other things. And the essence of, the point I'm really making is there is deep power in synergy. When you see that you have a strength that the other, and you want to penetrate a space, and you see that there is an industry leader, you need to begin to think of collaboration instead of starting from the bottom up, which is what the chances are that a typical African venture would do. So this is a kind of partnership you need to start thinking about. And I tell you something, this is something I believe would really help. And interestingly, again, for me growing up, the Africa that I grew up to know is one where individual strengths are identified and exploited in a good way. It's just that we did not take that context, we did not take that strength into the business space. We rather took that strength into the culture and this societal space where, for instance, you find somebody that owns a large expanse and is not doing anything. The large expanse is there empty and fallow. And then there is somebody that has skill in farming and in cultivating the land. And then the person with skill can come meet the owner of the land and say, please, can I use your land to farm? And at the end of the day, what it does, what that synergy does, is that the owner of the land can be at peace, that nobody would encroach or sell or tamper with his or her land. And then the farmer too can be at peace that he or she has the opportunity to at least farm within a period of time on that farmland or on that portion of land. But while we have this tendency to do this on a societal background or on a social level, we have not brought it into the space of business. And this is something we need to begin to rethink. This is something, it's a strength within us that we just need to pick and photocopy it and take it into the business space, whereby we are leveraging on what each person has to create something bigger and then to create a win-win situation for everybody. And this again is something I think that you and I need to begin to consider. And please share this video with people, post it on your status, let people see, because the more people we're able to reach, the better it becomes, the more people would have access to this information, which, if you agree with me, is going to help people out there. Share it with them, share it on your Facebook, share it on your Instagram, share it on your in fact, cut and share on your TikTok, share on your LinkedIn, just share it around. And this is just something you can do to show that you really appreciate what is being done in this conversation. Now, I will try to wrap this up on a conversation. You see, when you are going into synergy, the kind of synergy I just mentioned, which I said you need to look at strengths and weaknesses, there are factors you need to consider. And I will touch on those factors as we try to wrap up. Number one, you need to make sure that there is a shared vision. Now, I'm discussing this because if I'm pushing to say, look, instead of starting something new, go in and have, collaborate. In collaborating, there has to be a shared vision. There has to be something that connects you guys together. There has to be something that connects the brands together. You don't go into a relationship where you know that it's repulsive from the very beginning. In essence, if you try to put two sides of magnets and you're trying to combine it, and it will just keep being repulsive because they are not meant to glue in the first place. So in essence, you must find that there is shared vision. Where there is shared vision, where there is a meeting of point in vision, then the synergy becomes easier because the conversation will be around the shared vision and how that vision can be implemented through the work tool of the synergy that you are going to be having. So shared vision is very important. And then there has to be complementary strengths. In essence, you must be able to assess individual strengths of both brands and ensure that they complement. In essence, you have to be sure that you're not coming into a relationship that is going to be eventually parasitic in nature, and you understand what a parasitic relationship is. It means where a brand is feeding on the other and is taking advantage. A Shylock relationship, that is something you need to avoid as much as possible. And the next thing is there has to be innovation in what is being done. The end result must be such that the product coming out or the service coming out is innovative. If it's not innovative, then competition, it may be hard to overcome competition from other brands that are around. So you need to think of it. What's that inventive thing? What's that innovative solution that we are coming up with from this synergy? So don't forget again, if it's not innovative, it can be easily defeated by competition. And this is what you are trying to avoid. You do not want to bring in your fund and then begin to push over competition and all of that. In essence, if it's not innovative and you are tempted to begin to put in too much on that, trying to beat competition and all of that, you would lose touch with the joy that comes from the product into just trying to push the product and make it to stay afloat, and that becomes a distraction in itself. So don't forget, it's important for that brand and that product to come up with something really, really innovative. And finally, it's important that it has to be customer focused. In essence, identify and ask yourself, what value are we bringing to the market? What is that thing that we are bringing, which satisfies customers from the synergy? It has to be customer centric. You have to think of that thing, and this is how you make synergies to work. Taking the example of because again, if you do this rightly, you find that you beat competition a lot, and you beat competition so much that it will only remind you of many stories you've read. I remember growing up, one of the stories I read was the story of some people that just came up with the idea that can they build a tower that can get up to the clouds, which we call up to the heavens. And they thought this in their hearts, and they started the journey. And there was the greater force, which is God here, saying that look, if these people are united, there is nothing that can be kept away from them, nothing can be hidden from them. It is the same thing in synergies. There are synergies that when you get into, even the forces and authorities, even government and agencies will begin to say that look, if this synergy should work, nothing can be hidden from these people. And I'm not speaking theory here. There are practical examples. One of such examples is the example of Adobe and Figma, which I think happened in the year 2022. That synergy was going to defeat competition. It was going to defeat competition so much that multiple countries were interested in making sure that the synergy does not go through. Many countries in EU, United States, everybody was just around to make sure that it doesn't go through. And they made sure it didn't go through on the banner of what is called antitrust laws, meaning, anti-competition laws. In essence, if that synergy goes through, it has tendency to then defeat competition. And what was really the gist? Now, Adobe had, Figma, let's start with Figma, had this strength in collaborative features in its tools, and such that it allows multiple users to work on the same design simultaneously. And for Adobe, Adobe was known for its creative software, which included Photoshop, as many people already know, Illustrator, and what is called XD. And the thing was that if this acquisition had come up, most likely it would have defeated a lot of competition. So, what regulators did in multiple regions, as said, including US, European Union, they had to begin to scrutinize the deal for potential anti-competitive effects. In essence, if this deal would go through, competition will be reduced in the design software market, and then it's going to eventually, potentially, not eventually, potentially lead to a situation where prices are not easily determined because competition has been killed by that synergy. Now, this story I just shared with you is the power of collaboration, and you need to begin to think about it. My name is Eita Oguyemi, and thank you for being a part of this conversation. I'll see you again next week, and I do hope you have for yourself a wonderful, wonderful week ahead. Thank you once again, mommy and daddy on the call. Thank you so much. God bless you. Okay.